All right, Guru Nation, I have a very special one for you today. I love having former FDA people on. They're so hard to get on the show. I'm trying. We probably, Mark, have mutual acquaintances in and out of that world and that infrastructure there. But we have Marc Scheinesen, and he's recently retired partner and senior counsel currently at Alston and Bird in DC, one of the most influential food and drug lawyers in the country. And that's not hyperbole. I mean it in the literal sense. Mark didn't just practice FDA law, he helped to write it. As Associate Commissioner for Legislative Affairs under David Kessler, he was one of the architects for PDUFA, which is something we take for granted now, but it's the user fee system that basically funds how the FDA reviews drugs today. We're going to get into that for sure. He served at the FDA from 1990 to 1992, leaving when the Bush administration ended, and he took everything he learned inside the agency into 30 years of private practice, everything from negotiating GMP consent decrees to advising on COVID EUAs to guiding companies through some of the most complex regulatory due diligence in business. And now, in what might be the most fitting chapter of his career, he's back at his alma mater, the University of Cincinnati College of Law, teaching the next generation of lawyers, introducing the food, drug, and device law. Mark, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Dan, for having me.
Hopefully, I got the intro right. I know this it could be a 1 hour intro if we wanted to, but you're pretty accomplished. If we missed anything, let me know.
It's actually been 45 years of practice
Wow.
um, dealing with FDA inside and out, and I have the scars to prove it.
Hopefully mental only and not physical. Uh, what surprises your law students the most when they start learning FDA law? I guess that's a good icebreaker.
Yeah, no, I think they're surprised by how broad FDA's jurisdiction is. They say that FDA regulates anywhere from a quarter to a third of the American economy or every dollar the consumer spends. They have such a broad jurisdiction, not just in traditional food drugs, but cosmetics and consumer healthcare products, medical devices, anything that emits radiation, like TVs or cell phones or
Hmm.
light bulbs, and um, they even regulate the kitchens on aircraft and cruise ships. Who knew?
Who knew? Somebody's got to do it. It might as well be them. So I guess the surprising thing to the students, like most people have this idealistic view of what the FDA actually is, what it's supposed to be. It's probably one of the most scrutinized agencies, maybe even more so after COVID. When COVID first came on the scenes, I told my clinical research peers, I said, you know what? This is our chance to finally win the public trust over because we're gonna like the whole world's gonna rely on clinical trials to get us through this. And it turns out we probably did more harm than good when it comes to public trust. I mean, if you look at the average Joe today, it's very polarized. They're either very distrustful of everything that comes out of the FDA or they just agree with everything. And I think we missed an opportunity there during COVID. I don't know exactly what went wrong. It's probably pretty complicated and worth a series of podcasts, but what are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I agree with you completely. I mean, um, most scientists would agree that FDA acted very quickly, and which is not something that you equate with FDA as far as the emergency use authorizations and getting products to market, getting ventilators and face masks testing kits into consumers' hands, not just the vaccines, of which there were numerous numbers that were approved, and scientists would say that it saved millions of lives. But if you were one of those lives that were spared, or you never contracted COVID, either because you used a face mask or you distanced yourself 8 feet or 6 feet or whatever the number was, or you were vaccinated, fully vaccinated, where you had some of the prophylactic drugs that made the disease less, you might not feel that these were important. But I think most people uh, would acknowledge that they were spared from something that could have been as serious as the Spanish flu
Hmm.
was, after World War I, which killed, millions of people. That could have happened in the United States, and in fact, a million people probably died in the United States from COVID in its early years. So I think FDA deserves kudos and the public health establishment for being safe. Better safe than sorry, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get back to that because I think that encompasses some of your career arc as well. And but let's start maybe from the beginning. So early on, well, pre-FDA, what was your career? How did your career transpire pre-FDA and how did you end up there?
Yeah, thanks. I was a bit of a, if you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, it starts with a feather blowing in the wind, which is how many Washington, D.C. careers evolve. You sort of go where the demand is. And I started as a campaign manager for my congressman after law school, a guy named Bill Gradison, who was a very respected moderate Republican. There aren't too many moderate Republicans left here because of redistricting and other things. But he was the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee of Ways and Means, and I did his work. And then I went into a law firm, and one of my partners was the became the chief of staff to Lewis Sullivan, who was a secretary of HHS, a former uh, a physician and the head uh, of a Georgia historically black university medical school, and served Dr. Sullivan and David Kessler, and who, I think history will show was one of the great FDA commissioners. He served for 6 or 7 years, which is unheard of because it's such a lightning bolt. You can't, you have various constituencies, none of whom agree, between physicians and who don't like to be regulated, and industry and consumer groups and others that are always fighting. But he really revolutionized the drug approval process and made drugs available much more quickly.
So on the House Committee on Ways and Means that you just told us about, I think this put you at the mm, intersection of public policy and or public health and fiscal policy. Do you think that kind of prepared you for the next phase of your career, which was the FDA under Kessler? And what did you learn there on the Hill that you took with you the rest of your career?
Yeah, I mean, most importantly, I learned that it doesn't just matter what drugs are available and approved. It also matters how you're going to pay for those drugs,
Mhm.
and getting CMS and the Medicare system and the federal health insurance system to work together with the regulator is key and very important. And that happened for a couple of years when Mark McClellan was commissioner of FDA. He had also been the administrator of CMS. So he
Hmm.
had the ability to get those groups to talk to each other and work together. But drug development is really two tracks. I learned one is making sure the drug is safe and effective and available to the public. at the earliest possible time, but the other is also making sure that it can be reimbursed or is affordable and approvable.
Yeah.
So those
Which
have to
which
work
one
together.
is which one is more difficult?
Yeah, good question. There's no economy of scale. They're both very difficult, and it would be great if the process could be streamlined a little more. And there have been efforts to do that, and also efforts by the Trump administration to try to make drugs a little more affordable.
Hmm.
But drug companies in this country face some hurdles that other countries don't face, like product liability lawyers,
Mm.
and every drug has its own risks. It's
Those
they're
damn
kind of
lawyers, man, they ruin everything.
yeah, too many of them.
Well, do you think Trump is on the right track with the most favored nation and kind of what he's pursuing there as far as what he's proposing? And seems like a lot of them are back to onshoring now.
Yeah, I think he's saying the right things. Whether there's follow through and how much litigation he's going to duck by the drug companies. I mean, things
Mm.
work best with consensus. And if you can negotiate with drug companies, which is what he's doing, I think he's using the parity with foreign countries as a weapon or as a stick, and hoping that they'll voluntarily make some drugs more affordable or lower prices in certain categories. That certainly worked for insulin and some other frequently used drugs that are now less expensive. But I think negotiation as opposed to litigation is the key, and that's coming from a lawyer, which is unique.
Okay, so the FDA during the Kessler era, what was that like for you? What was the day-to-day reality of that transformation?
Well, Kessler was a unique and is a unique individual. He's still around,
Hmm.
still writing and speaking and teaching. But he had a unique background. He was, I think, he was uh, a Harvard lawyer and a University of Chicago physician, or I might have had that backwards. He got both degrees, an MD and a JD, like simultaneously together in a 5-year curriculum, which is amazing. So
Wow.
he also had legislative experience working for Orrin Hatch on the Senate side, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, or the Health Committee now.
Wow.
So he brought a lot of ideas and had 50 projects going simultaneously, thinking that his time would be more limited than it ultimately was. So everybody worked hard. He brought together a great staff and great ideas. So there were real innovations that occurred during
Hmm.
his term in trying to streamline the drug approval process. Um, Accelerated approval
Yeah.
for the AIDS community, the HIV community was very active and needed drugs quickly because the lifespan of a patient once they contracted HIV virus was very short. So
Right.
there was accelerated approval. It led to proteinase inhibitors, which has isn't a cure. You have to take them for your life, but certainly save millions and millions of lives
Oh, it took
around the world.
something from a instant death sentence to a manageable disease. Uh, was it under Kessler? I gotta do a deep dive on him. You gave me an idea for another video, but I think more people need to learn about him. But was it under him that the 505(b)(2) pathway came about, or was that before? Was that before him?
Yeah, it was institutionalized through guidance and used a little bit more consistently to try to not require duplicative controlled clinical studies
Hmm.
when the literature might already be out there and might be usable and referenced. So it was all in his priority of trying to
Wow.
streamline drug
Yeah, no,
approvals.
he definitely deserves a deep dive profile. You gave me another homework assignment I'm gonna be working on. I think this 505(b)(2) in particular is one of the more underrated aspects of drug development that investors have figured out on the retail side, but I also think us working in the clinical research space as site owners appreciate and often take for granted. Uh,
And it might key into what McCary is trying to do here with
yes.
just one clinical trial, combined with either real world evidence or other supportive evidence that's out
Hmm.
there, and certainly published literature if it's if it's valid, and controlled clinical trials um, through international medical reviews of existing literature, could really streamline that process.
Yeah, I would. I'm glad you brought him up. I've been trying to get more information on them, and clearly they're busy, way too busy to come on my podcast. But it seems like the community sentiment around what they're trying to do, initially, at least some, when they first started, was optimistic. And now, instead of optimism, we have just, it seems like chaos. Like, well, yeah, real world evidence will be except when it's time to approve a drug that used real world evidence. Then it's like, well, we need more. What are your thoughts if you can give a report card or just some commentary on how this current administration's doing? I'd be
Right.
curious to hear.
Right. There are pros and cons to be fair.
Hmm.
Certainly there has been a brain drain at FDA, and very experienced folks seeking the exits. Peter Marks comes to mind. I mean, he was a great administrator, and very open to new ideas as the head of CBER, and in the chief vaccine reviewer. His loss is incalculable. He had no trouble, finding a job for 10 times his salary at Lilly, establishing a vaccine program. But he was a huge benefit, and a very valuable public servant. Janet Woodcock was going to retire anyway. And she was institutional knowledge, as was Bob Temple, who kind of was the father of the controlled clinical trial, who just got old. We're not immortal. He didn't
Yeah.
find the fountain of youth. Losing Rick Pastor on the cancer side is enormous. So there have been folks heading for the exits, and they've got to replace them. They got rid of the pipeline, in probationary employees as a first Doge initiative, and that eliminated all the kind of the talented young people that will replenish the staffs. So they're going to have some time. It's going to be time until they can staff up appropriately. The initiatives only work if they work at the ground level, which is the reviewers. If the
Yeah.
reviewers are willing to consider new drug studies without animal research, or with cells on a chip, or something else, or one clinical trial for which the protocols are agreed to. um, that's great, but that has to be implemented at the reviewer level, so they have to know what the policymakers are doing and sign off on it, and the policymakers have to monitor that very closely.
The brain drain, I heard McCary mention on his podcast that there are actually no reviewers or scientific people let go involuntarily. And so I guess what the community's concerned about or confused with is where is the friction between the new folks who seem to be smart people, Vinay, McCary, and some of these people who left on their own terms? Like where would you pinpoint was the actual source of the friction, and why couldn't they work or get along together?
Well, I'm not sure science is king in
Hmm.
this administration. And these are trained people that have trained their whole lives to answer the questions that they're being asked, and that can't be done politically. So there has to be some value in scientific understanding and some deference to the scientists. McCary said maybe no one has left involuntarily, but a lot have left voluntarily,
A lot,
uh,
yeah. Yeah.
because they can make 10 times more in private industry, or they can help with applications. And hopefully those applications will improve because of former FDA officials' input into helping draft them. And hopefully the interchange between existing FDA and former FDA will be strong and productive.
If you had to give them a grade, what would you give them, this new
Uh,
regime?
an incomplete. No, no grade yet.
No grade. They still have
I'm going
time,
to duck
right?
the question.
They still have time. I guess Vinay is still there for the time being, although every 6 months it seems to change. But I know for investors, anyone in the biologics under his jurisdiction of CBER, they're worried. It's almost like some of these assets are untouchable when it comes to gene therapy. It's almost like, well, is that under the jurisdiction of Prasad? Because we that's an added element of risk, which actually begs the ethical question of is that actually a bad thing? Or do we just not like it because we're investors? I mean, I don't know. I don't know the right answer, but certainly less chaos is better, I think. Um, but
Well, I
maybe.
mean, FDA signal, had a very alarming signal where it kind of was refusing to even review a messenger RNA application for flu, coming
Hmm.
from Moderna. They retrenched on that. It's first it was illegal. They
Hmm.
can't refuse. They can find an application isn't, complete, or that the drug isn't safe or effective, but they can't
Right.
refuse to review an application in
Right.
which millions of dollars have been spent because of some MAGA concerns about messenger RNA, influencing your life. Those
Yeah.
those those drugs came to market, those vaccines were a miracle, because there had been so much basic research at NIH, funded by NIH and others, on messenger RNA as a vector to getting vaccines into the system. It wasn't that they were approved in 6 months. It was that there was 30 years of research that led up to
Very
those
true.
vectors and uses.
The same thing with gene therapy. I mean, they're finding some AAV issues, which this is why we do the research, right? We're finding the safety and efficacy of these things. It's actually a good segue to PDUFA. So you right before you left in 92, right? PDUFA passed, if I got the dates right. Uh
Right.
and what was it like to help get that across the finish line? It's almost impossible to imagine an FDA without PDUFA, but reading the historical articles from the 90s, there were critics. They said, look, they had something to point to. See, Big Pharma's paying for the drug approvals, but I'm sure you've experienced a lot of that at the time. Can you kind of just walk us through the before and after and what the industry looks like now? What, 40 years after? That's crazy to think. Post PDUFA, what was it like before versus now, and what were some of the criticisms you guys were facing at the time?
Sure, sure, sure. Um, PDUFA, which is an acronym for your audience, which stands for Prescription Drug User Fee Act. Um,
Most
kind
people
of
think, oh, that's the date that the FDA is going to approve a drug or not. That's the
right,
PDUFA date. But no, there's actually a name for the for the acronym. So thank you.
right, and resulted in a range of user fees for generic drugs too, which was resisted at first, and biologics and medical devices and animal drugs and other kinds of fees. OTC drugs now that don't pay for approvals. That's, anybody that says that doesn't understand FDA or what these programs do. Our resources that are used to hire more reviewers. So instead of, thousands of pages in somebody's files or on their desk, and no assignments, applications can be assigned to a reviewer right away. You can hire more people and more experienced people. There are ethics rules in place. Anybody that knows FDA knows that if anything, it's adverse to industry. You know, scientists being scientists and the government kind of resent that they could make 10 times more if they were in a company, but have made a public health or a lifestyle choice to work at FDA. They are
Hmm.
not influenced by industry because of user fees, which now can be $2 or $3 million per application. You know, they started at three or $400,000, but the program has grown every year. Every 5 years, they decide how the program is going to be reauthorized. Industry put that into place to make sure the money was being used wisely and that FDA was actually reducing the time that it took to review applications, which was the goal. They were performance goals. They weren't in law. They were just goals. And FDA had to prepare complete response letters in those times and report to Congress annually on whether they were meeting those standards or not. And those were the levers that were put in place. It was a delicate balance. Industry, groaned about paying a lot of money, and they thought that those fees would go up, which in fact they did, and they wanted some bang for the buck. They didn't want the money just being put into hiring more investigators to come into their plants and impose compliance objectives. They wanted to make sure it was going where it needed to go. And they put controls. They wanted to make sure that Congress wouldn't take these hundreds of millions of dollars and reduce direct appropriations going to FDA. So FDA would still have no more money. So they put a floor in place to make sure that if Congress tried to reduce FDA's funding at certain levels, those user fees would be terminated, would go away as a protection. So it was a delicate balance. There was a guy named Jerry Mossinghoff who was the head of pharma at the time, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturing Association, which represents innovator drug manufacturers, who helped negotiate that with David Kessler, and I was his agent in the negotiations to try to frame this. And then Senator Ted Kennedy, who was a strong leader in the healthcare environment as a Democrat, got together with his Republican counterpart, Orrin Hatch. They worked very well together, and there was bipartisanship. So this changed the agency, the way the agency functioned. Janet Woodcock, to her credit, had to redesign the entire regulatory process to make sure they could meet these standards and these deadlines.
Wow.
And so the whole review process was reformulated, and now we have
More streamlined,
um,
or was it designed to be more streamlined post PDUFA? Like we had deliverables, transparency as far as dates and all that stuff.
yeah, the latter, and that had to be put into place to make sure that the process was much more efficient, that
So
they hired up.
how did it
Yeah.
work before PDUFA? Like what was the process for
Yeah,
getting a
yeah.
drug through trials or
There were no deadlines, so paper could, and these applications were paper at the time before kind of electronic applications came into play, and
hmm
the average NDA, new drug application, could fill two tractor trailers full of paper, if you can believe it. That's
Yeah,
that's how big, with case studies from every trial of every
I've heard
patient.
stories. I've heard some attorneys I know, Darshan Kulkarni mentioned that on the show. They were like like semi trucks of data, and I guess they were missing some pages, and he had to personally go drive it and drop it off.
FDA would let you know that they lost your application. Could you please resubmit it?
Wow.
Uh, and it could take 2 years, 5 years. Applications could stay on people's desks and not be assigned to a reviewer for a year.
Hmm.
So, the company's life is based on these approvals, not to mention patients' lives of
hmm
trying to get access first before their European counterparts.
hmm
It just it changed the whole ethos. Everybody had accountability now and had deadlines, and
Yeah.
accountability in the bureaucracy is a pretty important component.
And this happened right after, I guess it was Genentech that kind of proved that you can use technology in a way to like discover new drugs. So was this in response to anticipating a lot more innovation in the space? Or was it just something that needed to be done regardless of whether there was going to be innovation? Because that right after PDUFA was like almost like a J curve going up as far as new drug applications and things like that.
Yeah, it needed to be done anyway. Genentech kind of was a leader in
Hmm.
biologics
Hmm.
and biologic licensing applications as opposed to NDAs, and
Mm.
they had some of the first innovator drugs in that field. So that led to a reorganization where CBER um, gave up the authority over applications to CDER, which had the new user fee and was much more efficient. And then
Ah, gotcha,
CBER
gotcha.
kept blood products and other things, but the therapeutics and biologics went to CDER um, to review under the user fee regime.
Gotcha, gotcha. And today, CBER is anything biologics and what else?
Yeah, cell therapy, blood
So
products, gene therapy, vaccines,
gotcha.
all important products, and there's a lot of work that can be done over there too. And Peter Marks was in the process of making those changes. I mean, cell therapies have not advanced, and
Right.
using your own cells or stem cells to heal yourself what could be, what more important? And there are a lot of changes FDA could make, and
Hmm.
hopefully McCary will see that in some of the definitions they use to get cell therapies reviewed and approved much more rapidly.
Yeah, that's true because you're hearing, people going to Mexico, going to Europe, overseas to get stem cell therapy done when we should be leading that
Right.
over here in the US. So it's kind of goes contrary to what they're saying about everything else as far as innovation. Um, Very interesting how the history of PDUFA kind of came about and how many years did it take to finally get that passed?
Well, yeah, that was the miracle. It was like good karma or harmonic convergence or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. It was done in less than a year.
Wow. Whose idea was
Uh,
it? Like, hey, we should just charge the drug companies to pay
it
for their,
was, yep, it was David Kessler's idea
huh?
and handed off to me to implement
To implement,
and,
okay.
and others, but there was a will. I mean, you know,
So his idea,
uh,
and he said, Mark, make sure this is legal and we can run. We have a
uh,
chance in Congress.
get the parties together and let's start negotiating and having
Wow.
negotiating sessions within the agency and at HHS and with Mossinghoff and pharma and industry
Yeah.
and bio, which represent
Yeah.
the biologics companies. Everybody came to the table. FDA's
Hmm.
ace in the hole was it was so inefficient and things were taking so long that companies were willing to compromise and even pay big
Wow.
bucks to just fix the system because it
Yeah.
was so incomplete at that time.
Interesting. What what do you think? I mean, I don't think too many people are would argue that PDUFA's a bad idea now, but at the time, what were some of I guess if you were to steel man the other side, no, Mark, this is a bad idea. Like, what were some of the better points that they were throwing around?
Yeah, and there were a lot of those. I mean, one you pointed out at the beginning of the show, if companies pay the piper, can they call the tune? And that was resolved because the money comes in a totally different way, in a totally different office, and none of the review divisions even know whether user fees have been paid or how much
Mm-hmm.
was paid. It comes into the budget office and the accounting functions of the agency and is solicited in a totally separate structure.
Hmm.
So that the Democrats, were comfortable with that.
Yeah.
They were shutting out small businesses because the fees were so high. They worried that small businesses couldn't get access, even though they had innovative products, and that there'd be a lot of mergers and acquisitions, big companies buying little companies' technology. And that has occurred to a certain extent, but there were small business exceptions put into the law that allowed fees to be waived or reduced, at least for the first NDA, for the first
Hmm.
application, and
I
that
see.
helped resolve that question. Generics didn't want to be part of it because they didn't think their markups were enough, and they didn't have patent protection for the generic products, and they didn't want to play ball. But ultimately, they caved in because generics were taking so long to approve because all the resources were going to the new drugs and the
I see.
branded drugs under user fees and the performance standards that that generic approvals lagged.
Yeah,
So they ultimately generic drug user fee act came into place now.
interesting.
So, yeah.
There's a lot of critics of pharma. I guess sometimes I'm one too, although I work in the space, but I try to take a rational approach to most things. A lot of the criticism, not just around FDA, but any government agency, is regulatory capture. This term that they use, they call regulatory capture. Hey, if we make it, now we can lobby and set the bar higher and kind of kick the ladder down so that the smaller companies, our competitors, can't climb it. If that were true in pharma, which I'm not saying it's not true to some extent, but using PDUFA as an example, PDUFA could actually be exhibit A of why that doesn't exist because you said it started out 300,000 or so. Now it's about 1 to 2 million. It would be more like 20 million for that to be true. I think these days 1 or 2 million is not that much when you're talking about drug development, when it's going to cost you at least that much to actually do the trials. So I think that's maybe one example of regulatory capture, at least in this example, not being all that it's made out to be. At least in this particular case. Because the
Yeah,
fees would have
no,
been, if there was no control on these fees, I mean, the lobbyists would have taken this up to like 50 million, 100 million. Then you keep all the other people out.
right. A detailed formula was put into place again every 5 years to know what the cost was that the agency had to fund and how many applications it was anticipating.
Hmm.
So there was a formula, so they couldn't, raise the prices indiscriminately and
Hmm.
kept everybody into play. And it takes money to make money.
Yeah,
You can't be a pharmaceutical drug developer when the average trial is 15 to 30 million dollars. You've got to have some funding and you've got phases and you got to show that it works
yeah.
and you've got to have investors. So the market, the market works well in this space.
This is a good
And
example of public-private, not so much partnership, but collaboration and keeping taxpayer money as far away from it as possible. Well, I think this is a genius. Not just because you're on. I never actually thought about the mechanics of PDUFA, but now that you're on, I'm starting to look into it more.
yeah, partnership is really what it is and what it takes. And the more interactive FDA can be
Yeah.
in helping be part of the drug development program without being co-opted by it, the more efficient and the benefit is to you and me as patients and consumers.
Yeah. It seems, from what I hear, critics of Prasad, who's not running the FDA, it's McCary, but is that he's anti-pharma. And I don't know if that's true or not. I don't really know where that comes from other than I read one of his books, the book on called uh, Malignant. It's on the pricing of drug therapeutics and the regulatory process that they have to go through. But this is again one of those things where people who like to take the anti-pharma stance typically point and say, see, industry funds the FDA. How could we trust them? Well, if you just look under the hood, you can see it's a lot more complicated than that. I do think there is some cause for concern when it comes to the revolving door of maybe senior leadership at FDA going to drug companies and or vice versa. Um, Although I haven't really heard anything, any evidence like to show that there's true conflicts other than pointing to potential conflicts, which is easy to do with anything. Before we move on to other questions I had for you, you want to give some comments on this revolving door thing that
Sure,
everyone likes to point to that's anti-pharma and say, see, we can't trust the FDA because they're really the industry disguised as the ones looking out for our own good.
sure. First one important point about FDA is that the agency reviews research. It doesn't do research. So if they don't have an interaction relationship with the people that take the risks and fund the research, which is meticulous research to get a controlled clinical trial that constitutes substantial evidence, which are the legal terms. As I said, it's 15 to 30 million dollars and takes 5 to 10 years. I mean, it's immense. It's an immense job. Um, the revolving door has ethical limits as long as they're understood and enforced. There's something called DESI, which is the Ethics Act, which means if you were personally and directly responsible for an issue, you have a lifetime ban. You can't work on the issue at all
Hmm.
if you were the decision maker. And if you weren't, there's a 1 year limit, and there's an office within FDA that reviews those encounters, and so folks, that revolving door is very slow. It doesn't turn that quickly. So by the time that person gets back into a meeting with FDA, it could be a year, it could be 5 or 10 years. They never have meetings. They're just the
Interesting.
strategic people or the people that help prepare the
But what about
application.
like so they would point back to, well, you can't tell me this guy doesn't know so and so who's currently there and they can call him up and like pull some favors for us.
Yeah, it's an ethics violation if they do
Yeah.
that within a year of, if they were personally and directly responsible, like, if Dr. Marks was calling, you know, uh, Sieber to ask a question, I mean, he'd be the decision maker. He's barred for life
Wow.
from
Wow.
um, contacting them in anything that he was personally and directly responsible as
Yeah.
a decision maker.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, that's
Not that
uh
ethics has been, enforced universally or fairly in this administration.
right, right. But do you think people have valid concerns here or you think it's overblown?
Yeah, I think it's watched carefully, especially by competitors.
Yeah.
That would be
Uh
the whistleblowers, and it's kind of a self-regulatory, self-enforcing system.
Good
So,
point.
so,
Good
so
point.
I think it's theoretical, and if there are specific examples, I think they would be coming into the
Good.
public fray.
Good point. That's why you're the attorney. That's the good point right there that I've never heard brought up to the other side. The competitor angle is very real. If you look at citizens' petitions, you can see competitors trying to get involved when they have something up for review. And yeah, okay. Fair point. Fair point, Mark.
And it's a transparent policy. It's a transparent process when you get to advisory committees. Those are public meetings
Right.
for recommendations. The agency makes its presentations. There are public presentations allowed, and you see kind of what's behind the curtain in most cases. The drug development process is fairly open and transparent.
I got you. Yes, I think we need to be more sophisticated when we look at things and make claims like this, not just as investors, but as people with questions. Um, Bringing it back to clinical research now. So what are the most common compliance mistakes you've seen CROs and sites make, investigators, uh, that perhaps they didn't even realize are problems when it comes to running trials, or maybe the sponsors, like just any stakeholder that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, PDUFA, getting back to that because it reshaped the industry,
Hmm.
is is complex and has a lot of checks and balances in it. And one is since you're paying huge amounts in application fees, you want interaction with the agency. So there are meetings that are mandated, pre-phase one meetings, phase two, phase three, the IND, investigational new drug application that starts is a license for human research. All of those require meetings with the agency. Unfortunately, FDA is still a little bit of a Zoom agency, still virtual. There aren't a lot of these face-to-face meetings that used to occur
Hmm.
prior to COVID that are occurring, but most knowledgeable companies will fly in and insist on a face-to-face meeting. The mistakes are communications mistakes, 8 times out of 10. By not asking the right questions, getting the review team in a room, making sure that if you're going to sink $30 million into a trial, that protocol is agreed to, and you know what's being required and requested and why by
Hmm.
FDA. There's a program called Special Protocol Assessments, SPAs, which are actually contracts between the industry developer, the drug developer, and FDA, that if we reach these milestones in this way, that the application is going to be approvable. And so it kind of limits the risk a little bit or reduces the risk of the manufacturer and its investors.
Hmm.
So there are all kinds of mechanisms that the company and the CROs can use to just make sure they're on the same wavelength. And
Now
um,
these spas are available for every company, or how does
for new
for
drugs
new drug?
in circumstances that are agreeable, where there aren't sort of open issues, but the kind of disease and its progression and how you can show efficacy are understood, sort of, and agreed to.
I see. So communication issues, meaning the lack of asking the right questions from the company side.
Right. You don't want to leave ambiguities. You want to
Right.
nail everything down. And a plug to food and drug lawyers or others. They should be in the room. They're not hostile. They're not litigators. They're regulatory professionals that can make sure that minutes are kept and that they're circulated and sort of agreed
Hmm.
to on both sides. And you've got in place, administrative records. So once the research is complete and is being reviewed and questions are raised, you can point gently the FDA reviewers to where this was discussed and what kind of agreements were made, and
Hmm.
if they move the target or go off the reservation or require endless, redos, you can push back on that in the
Hmm.
interest of drug development.
Maybe that's timely advice these days. That's what I'm hearing a
Get
lot
it
of
in
complaints
writing.
out there. Get it in writing. Okay. Um, GMP, good manufacturing practices. Lately, there's been a lot of issues with the FDA on the CMC side. Uh, for most pharma companies, that would feel like a death sentence, right? Having a GMC consent degree negotiation. Uh, Certain trials you can redo a study, fix the data, find a better design. But when it comes to manufacturing, that's make or break. What advice do you have for sponsors when it comes to that?
Yeah, and my law partner, Kathy Burgess, is an expert in this area and spends a lot of time in India and China and other places where a lot of the development, especially of the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, are taking place. But that is fraught with dangers because GMPs are general and are ambiguous, and
Mhm.
one inspector can make a ruling that another inspector didn't, and you can have an inspection within 6 months of each other and get a totally different result. And if anything is leading to an increase in prices and drug shortages, it's just inconsistent application of good manufacturing practices. Company, FDA has to draw the line, and Jana Woodcock was able to do that because of her knowledge and seniority. I'm hoping the new leadership at Cedar and Sieber are able to harness these field investigators, and just because they make a finding, it goes up, it should go up a chain of review, and it should be determined, does this affect safety? And, what's this going to mean to the company and the drug development? Is it going to push it back? And is it justified, or can this be resolved in other ways? But,
Mhm.
FDA is either not inspecting as much, or when they're getting to a company, it could be an inconsistent inspection or a new reviewer because they've had brain drain in the districts too for inspectors and investigators. You can get, a 48-page 483, which is a notice of observations or
Warning letter.
deficiencies that can paralyze a company, and nobody's filtered that out to determine which of these really matters, which are technical and don't
Huh.
affect the safety or efficacy of the drug, and which can be, and which do, and how to
Mhm.
prioritize and find a path toward a common ground
Yeah, the brain drain's a
between.
good point because they're pushing for at-home manufacturing, yet I guess we need more reviewers, or as we're being led to believe, AI can do it to some extent. Although AI is not going to be boots on the ground at a facility, but maybe going through the findings. Do you see that as a possible solution?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, AI is interesting. I mean, it's best as you know, it's if you do a Google search and get a summary, it's best at reviewing lots and lots of documents instead of your eyes and kind of summarizing them for you based on parameters that you've set. But
Hmm.
it's garbage in, garbage out. If you didn't set the right parameters, then you've missed
Yeah,
what you were looking for, and it's not as helpful, but
right,
certainly
right.
can expedite review of voluminous material.
It's a lot of scary things for investors as well. But what dat when it, which data is reviewed first, or is there actually like a blueprint for how this should be done? Would it be the study data itself, like from the investigative sites, or would it be the manufacturing data? Or are they both kind of done concurrently, and then you kind of figure out when it's too late? Hey, you had a manufacturing issue this whole time.
For GMP inspections, are you
Yeah,
talking about?
GMP and
Yeah,
GCP, like just
yeah,
when the study, the
yeah.
complete study clinical study results are being sent. You have the inspectors going out, one going out to the sites for GCP, the other one going to the facility for GMP. Is there like an order it should be done, or do they just kind of do it when they have time?
Yeah, so for clinical trials, as your audience knows, that are CROs and others, those trials have to meet good clinical practices, but generally they're not audited by investigators unless there are questions raised, by competitors or complaints or
Mm,
some inconsistency in the data that's being presented, and an assignment is made by the review division to the district to take a look if they think there is fraud or inconsistency or based on whistleblowers or something. So not all trials are audited in that way. For manufacturing, there is a scenario and a schedule. Before a product can be approved, there's a pre-approval inspection of its manufacturing sites prior to approval. Once the drug is approvable, then their FDA's assigning field inspectors and investigators to look at the manufacturing process and make sure that it's consistent with their interpretations of GMPs before the product's approved.
I see. Um, how much does the identity of the FDA commissioner actually matter day-to-day operations? Like, is it really more about the staff more than the appointees, or uh, like more about the career staff than the political appointees, or would you say it actually matters? Like, who's the commissioner, who's in charge of CBER? Maybe we're all
Sure,
finding that out in real time.
sure. It just depends on the management style of the commissioner. You know,
Mm,
some commissioners have been more laissez-faire and let the inmates run the asylum to a certain extent, and career civil servants are fairly free to do what they want, and the commissioner would set the priorities or set the agenda. Some are more hands-on. Kessler was both. He was very hands-on, and the center directors are key to sign-offs. There's reevaluation at every level. They may just weigh in where there are issues that are raised by Congress. Congress sets priorities that they used to when they were knowledgeable about programs and had oversight. John Dingell, Waxman, Kennedy, and Hatch were the most knowledgeable about FDA's functions, and there would be oversight hearings, and their priorities would become FDA's priorities. That's fallen back a bit.
mm,
So it's mainly coming from how active the commissioner and the secretary of HHS is. We're reading the secretary of HHS has set priorities and personnel issues, and the White House has taken a more active role in what used to be scientific and not political, and that
mm.
creates some red flags and some concerns about how far you go.
Do
But
you think
it's a
McCary seems like a hands-off or hands-on guy?
um, it's still unclear.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's still an
it's
incomplete.
it seems like Prasad's very hands-on to the point of like even trying to mingle into other departments from some of the emails and things I've been reading. But McCary, it's hard to read him.
Yeah, that's why, Peter Marks was a good arbitrator. He knew
Mm,
that line.
yeah,
Um, I think others will find that line when they deviate far from it because there are checks and balances throughout the agency, either
yeah,
whistleblowers within the agency, of which, who would go to Congress and the Democrats and cause some oversight questions, or go to um, the public in certain circumstances. So,
I see. Were you able to watch any of the new FDA podcasts? I watched a few early on. I don't know if they're still doing them, honestly, but they were trying to portray the new spirit of like transparency, and we're going to get the public involved and get patient advocacy groups involved and do our like a sideshow of touring and meeting with physicians and patients, and all good things like on the surface. But I think what it boils down to is, are we getting more treatments out to market, quicker or not? And incomplete is fair, I think, but have you watched any of their
yeah, and
podcasts?
some of it just comes across as reassuring and love to see them follow through and implement. Some of it comes across as naive, and
Wow.
there's a limited amount of transparency that can occur for applications and progress and you know, proprietary development information that is are trade secrets, and even the status of an application because of competitors out there can't be disclosed by the agency, or people will be trading, insider trading. Can ask Martha Stewart about that at some at some point when that happened. That was a drug insider trading issue. Some of that information has to stay proprietary, and FDA doesn't announce, for instance, drug withdrawals or drug not approvable that's up to the company to do. They only announce approvals
Right.
when they after they occur.
Yeah, I know they were going to release CRLs in real time, complete response letters, and supposedly we would know as soon as the public would know as soon as the company, but that hasn't been the case because I'm checking one in particular and it's still not posted. So
It can't legally be done unless the company agrees to it. That's a proprietary trade
I
secret
see,
document,
I
internal
see.
agency deliberations, and it's not
Interesting.
even traditionally foilable under the Freedom of Information Act.
So either they were not aware of that when they announced it and are not following up on it, or they would have to make it like by law a requirement, right?
Right.
And
That's a
so what
brain drain where they lost somebody in the chief
wow,
counsel's office or didn't ask him or just went to, make the press hit without enough of a background
I
investigation.
see. So that would explain it because I'm looking at one and I can't find it, but I'm relying on the company slides for what they're showing us as far as the reason for their complete response letter.
Yeah.
That's the best answer I've gotten to date on this topic. Interesting. Okay. Well, we're in PDUFA 7 as we wrap up here. A genuine paradigm shift, move away from animal testing. What do you think of this? Like is it about time? Nobody likes to see beagles harmed. Uh,
Or primates or
or primates, yeah.
let's test it on humans first,
Yeah.
got a
Well,
higher pain threshold.
there's college
Uh,
kids willing.
that's right. The shock experiments and Ghostbusters. Um, yeah, no, it's more than time. I mean, FDA always wanted a belt and suspenders, and one species of animal wasn't enough in an IND to show safety or dose. You needed three different kinds of animals, and toxicology research is very expensive and time consuming, and it's not that helpful. Animals are not the same as humans, and you're not going to flag some of the most important or organ failures or but there are technologies now. AI is part of it. There are organs on chips that are human cells that can actually be subjected, and it's going to be a much more reliable thing. It's going to be much more humane for the animal rights advocates, and it's going to be less expensive and time consuming. So it's the science is there. It's time to move on. But a lot of the regulations need to be redrafted or reinterpreted because
Yeah,
they refer to animal studies, plural.
right. Yeah, and I feel like we're in a transitionary period between the old paradigm and eventually headed towards in silico trials, however many decades that is away from us. So we're in this like transitionary phase of maybe hybrid and slowly inching towards that. I guess as we close, and thank you so much, Mark, for coming on. We're gonna have to do part two and part three here and there. Maybe get you on as a regular commentator to what's happening with this current admin if you'd be willing to. But after, all your years across Congress, FDA, private practice, what's the one structural thing about how the FDA operates that most people in the industry still fundamentally misunderstand?
Yeah, gee, just choose one.
Just choose one, like top of mind for you. Doesn't mean the most important, just for you, subjectively, what you've seen.
It's a very important agency and a very dedicated workforce and a very experienced workforce, whether they're physicians or pharmacologists or biostatisticians. I mean, these are guys that train their lives and we, we ought to let them do their job and science ought to be important. But for the agency, they have to set priorities because they have such sweeping jurisdiction. It could be food one day or imports one day or infant formulas or GLP-1 drugs or COVID vaccines or
Psychedelics.
yeah, yeah, and they can't. The leadership can't. can't do it all and they can't manage it all. So you
Mm.
have to delegate. You have to understand that it's a paper agency. You know, it's they're not the innovators. They make it easier to innovate and to get investments, but the you know the technical research is done by CROs and by the community that's listening here, and it's paid for by the marketplace, by investors and manufacturers who take great risks sometimes to develop drugs based on what the ROI is going to be, the return on their investment, and we don't want to stand in the way, and FDA shouldn't stand in the way of that process and procedure, and um, you know, the hard decisions are made by industry, but the more FDA is becoming more and more interactive, and in this administration, it wants to be interactive, and that's Kessler understood the genius of that. You know, if you get everybody vested and talking in internal meetings and make communications stronger, you're gonna get better results and faster reviews and more safer and more effective drugs and devices.
Yeah. Well, if this new regime's good at anything, it's talking. So we'll see if that continues. Mark, we gotta get you on again, man. Next time something big happens, I'll email you. Maybe that might be tomorrow, the way things are going.
Thank you, Dan, for that opportunity and for the excellent questions.
Well, thank you for coming on and answering them. Not many people would answer all of them like you. Do you want people to go to any particular place to find you? Do you have a LinkedIn or any place you'd prefer they reach out?
Yeah, it's Mark Scheinesen at Alston, Alston, which is my lawfirm.com.
Not the email address. Very nice, very bold, but thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Anyone who wants to reach out, you could contact Mark directly. Clearly super knowledgeable and spent his entire career in these issues. So thank you very much, Mark, for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, and I hope you're not in New York, even though you have a Yankees hat on.
I just like the hat. No, we're here in Arizona, SoCal border, so it's very nice weather here. 80 degrees. Bye
Thank
bye,
you again.
everybody. Thank you, Mark.